Hello, everyone. Hope you're still enjoying ATX TV from the couch. We're so glad that you've joined us all weekend, but even more so, especially for this next conversation. Liz Tigelaar was one of our first supporters when we first started the festival, and even more than that, one of our first advisory board members. And for the past now 9 seasons, she's been helping us craft incredible conversations, both fun and the ones that are really important and can sometimes be tough to have. This next conversation is one that as soon as she told us about, we knew that we wanted to host. And that was even before this past week. We knew that we wanted to be a place where we could elevate new voices and elevate voices that you may not have heard before. And she was so proud of this writer's room she put together. And we're grateful to even have a small part in letting you get to know these writers as well. So with that, Liz, I'm going to bring you out.
Thank you so much. Thanks to you and to Caitlin and to all of ATX. I've been involved in ATX since the beginning, and it definitely feels like home. I wish we were all together, but
Same.
Technology aside, this is just as good. I just wanted to give a little intro and to say that obviously we're a show that's grieving right now on multiple levels. We're grieving for Lynn Shelton, our executive producer who directed 4 of the 8 episodes, who we tragically lost very suddenly. We're grieving for her family, for her friends, for her colleagues, and for her films that we're not going to get to see, all of her work that she was still, all the work she was still yet to do. And then we're also grieving with the country for the life of George Floyd, all the Black men and women who've been murdered simply for being Black. And today we really just wanted to have a conversation. I think now more than ever, whose stories we tell and who tells these stories, it matters more than ever. And so to talk about these stories and Little Fires and these characters, you know, whether it's a white liberal woman who doesn't see herself as racist at all, or a queer Black single mom whose art is her passion and her voice, or a Chinese illegal immigrant who's having to fight for custody in a country she wasn't born into, just to have her own daughter with her. These are all characters that get to be the jumping off point for conversation. It starts a dialogue that really helps us examine our own blind spots and our own biases and our own shortcomings, and hopefully expands and broadens our worldview. And so the writers I'm about to introduce you to, they crucially and critically shaped the series that is Little Fires Everywhere. And I mean it when I say if any one of them had not been in this room, it would not have been the same show. Their races, their genders, their sexualities, their families of origin, class, political views, age, entire life experience, their experiences made the show so much more impactful and so much more nuanced. And although we had a lot in common with each other, I think it was really our differences too that made this room so great. And so I want to introduce you. I could not love these people more. And I've been in a lot of rooms over my career, and it's hard for me to express what an exceptional, amazing room this is. I basically would love to live with all these people. Okay, so we have Nancy Wan.
Hi.
Raamla Mohamed.
Hi.
Attica Locke. Amy Talkington. Rosa Handelman. Harris Danow.
Hello.
And we have Shannon Houston, who couldn't be with us today. There's so much going on, and she's caring for her own family and friends today. So she's a voice that was also so incredibly critical in our room. And we'll miss her today, but we'll try to do her voice justice too, because she had a lot to add and brought so much to it, as did everybody here. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And what I really want to do is talk about you guys. I want to talk about who you are and how you came to imbue your voice and your passion and what mattered to you into this show. And then I want to talk about what it's like to be in a room, a good room, a bad room, and how a room can work together to bring out what you want to say. So I'd love to just go around and have each of you, I'll call on you but have each of you say who you are and why you connected to this book and wanted to even work on this show. You all have all the choice in the world of what projects you do, and I was lucky enough to have you join me here. So let's start. Nancy, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm Nancy. Sort of family dramas has been a really sort of core part of my career. I worked with Liz on American Dreams and Brothers and Sisters, and I even worked on Everwood back in the day. So that's always, those stories to me are always like the most incredibly moving and kind of vital and central to, what I like to talk about. As far as this book, I mean, I'm an immigrant, Asian, obviously, an immigrant. I wasn't born in this country. So that was something that drew me to this book, the character of BB. Also, just generally, being the mother of daughters, being an only child of a single mom, I really felt like I identified with parts of Mia and Elena and Pearl too. One of the things that my parents did was move us to a very small, dark apartment in a really great school district where I felt really kind of like I never fit in, and just felt that wealth disparity all the time, so I could get the education that I did, because we private school was not on the horizon for us. So that I felt very connected to Pearl in that way.
I've known Nancy for so long, since we were both baby writers. I remember I worked with her when she was pregnant with her first daughter and then her second daughter. And it was so joyful now to both be mothers talking about grappling with motherhood. And so there's so much, so much of the story, I will say, is the story that's on the screen. But I think this, what hopefully this room will show you today too, is that so much of what made this so powerful was the connections that we had and the bonds we had just from telling this story. Okay, I'm done with that now. Raamla.
Hi. So I read the book and I just kind of felt like I absorbed it. I loved all the characters. Also, for me, the story takes place in the 90s. That's when I was in high school. I have a big place in my heart for the 90s. I also, like Nancy, was the only child of a single mom. My dad is from Somalia, and so he was an immigrant. And so I have a lot of families who live abroad and have come to this country and had, kind of a difficult experience. I also I also went to kind of predominantly white school in 7th grade and into high school. And I definitely identified with Pearl and kind of microaggressions that happen and going into a new world. And I felt that all that stuff was really, really interesting and important. And, I think growing up in Los Angeles, it's essentially like a blue town, if you will. But a lot of what we talked about in the show was this idea of just because you're like a white liberal person doesn't mean like you're not racist. It doesn't mean like you don't have prejudices or don't have judgments against people that can be damaging. So it was really great to kind of be in this room and explore all those topics.
And also just to talk about kind of where you came from work-wise, you obviously had a really long ongoing relationship with Carrie.
Yeah. So I worked on Scandal for the entire 7-season run. And so Carrie was very excited about this project. And so I was lucky enough to come on and meet with Liz, and we bonded, and I'm so happy that I was able to be in this room.
All right, Attica.
So before I even knew that Carrie was going to be a part of this, I was drawn to the book as a mother, as a mother who sometimes has envy issues about other mothers and thinking they're doing it better or their kids like them more, like all those kind of feelings I already had. I also am the aunt of an adopted child, so I was really interested in those kinds of issues too. But then when you throw Carrie in the mix, I love stories that just keep complicating shit and then we got to figure out how to write our way out of it. Like, I love to approach storytelling that way. Like, just keep adding elements that make it more and more difficult and rich. And then we have to figure out as a team, how do we work our way through this? Like Raamla, I also thought of the 90s as a time when, like, we had our first Black president and we were all kind of patting ourselves on the back for like how far we'd come and all this kind of stuff. And there was a sense that if you weren't a foaming at the mouth, Confederate flag waving, white dude with missing some teeth, that you were cool. You hadn't done anything wrong and you had nothing to look at within yourself. So the idea of exploring microaggressions, which wasn't even a term we were using in the 90s, we just were suffering from them. It was just interesting to kind of really put that on blast. And I will say that both of our lead actresses were so, I think it's some of the best work of both of their careers, frankly. And I think they were both brave for different reasons. Carrie's Mia was so brave for not trying to jump in and make a white woman feel comfortable. And Reese was so brave to portray a kind of clueless white woman who is so uncomfortable and does not know what to say or do. All of this was just so rich to explore.
And can you talk a little bit about your TV background, but then also your amazing writing background?
Well, yes. So I came into TV through Empire. That was my first job ever. And I did that for 3 years. And I also worked on When They See Us. And then this was my third TV job ever. I also write books. So I've also written 5 books. And the very thing I was talking about, like, I love to just throw complications in that you have to write your way out of. That's how I approach books. So also the fact that we were adapting a book was fun for me. You
also love a courthouse step or hallway?
Both. The bathroom scene too. But I love courthouse shit. I love the judge going, I'll allow it. Just a little bit. I'll allow it.
All right, Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy. Reading the book, it was almost eerie. I mean, I come from a world not unlike Shaker Heights. There's some parallels. I come from a family where there were 4 of us, pretty much all the same age, 2 boys and 2 girls. 2 of them were step, but still, we all grew up together. And I was obsessed with art and felt very out of sync with that world and with my siblings. And so obviously I identified so much with Izzy and reading the book, and was really excited about expanding on her and bringing that story to the screen. But also when I left Dallas, I went to New York, and I landed there studying art, and that being such an intense and passionate time in my life, I identified so much with Mia's story, going to New York, and her hunger for art and her discovery of the mentor.
Do you want to? Can you tell just a little bit about like where you came from, your writing background?
Yeah, my writing background is mostly features. I
know what we're building toward.
Yes. Sort of indie. I come from sort of more indie film. I made a bunch of short films. I made an independent feature that I wrote and directed. I wrote some studio scripts, most of which are in development hell, but a couple have gotten made or are getting made. And then I had the incredible experience of getting to know Liz Tigelaar, developing a series together called The Ice Queens. I'm looking at the poster for it on my wall. It does not exist, but there's a poster for it. And it fell apart 2 weeks before production, but that's how I got to know Liz. That's how I landed in this room, which was really only my second room to that one. And
you have a little movie out right now.
And I wrote a movie called Valley Girl. It's a remake of the 80s cult classic. So that came out shockingly, even though it was in sort of development forever and then waiting to be released forever, it came out just a few weeks after Little Fires Everywhere. So that was a lot happening at once.
Yeah, amazing. All right, Rosa.
I'm Rosa. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. So I grew up in the 90s in Columbus, Ohio, but both my parents were from Cleveland. My dad's from Cleveland Heights, which is sort of the neighboring little town to Shaker Heights. So I grew up driving through Shaker Heights on the way to my grandparents' house and seeing this picturesque, seemingly beautiful town with these giant mansions that were not only huge, they were also very aesthetically pleasing, which as a kid seems to connote a place that has figured it out. And it was really interesting reading Celeste's book and sort of picking apart this perfect American town and showing just how insidious these class and race issues are in this town.
And we know each other from Casual and Ice Queens and Morning Show. And Rosa, I should say, you were incredibly helpful when I was breaking the pilot. You and Tracy Scott Wilson, because we were all paused on Morning Show, got to kind of break this pilot together. And you've been there from the very beginning. And then finally, Harris.
I was a writer's assistant on the newsroom prior to working on Casual. And before that, I was a lawyer. Yes, that's right. I spent 4 years as a lawyer. I blocked it out of my mind to a certain extent because I also grew up in the 90s and went to high school around the same time as the Richardsons. And, I think I had the same level of cluelessness as the Richardsons kids. And I'm going off a little bit of a tangent here, but a black classmate of mine from high school recently shared something online yesterday about her experience of when she was applying for college. She met with our guidance counselor and she had her heart set on St. John's. And she told the guidance counselor this. And the guidance counselor said to her, this is at my high school, said, I think you're being a little ambitious and should maybe try and get a job as a receptionist after you graduate. And and the fact that this was going on in my high school, that I had no idea that was going on, that I can even imagine that it was going on. And yet a version of that is fictionalized in our show. I mean, these were all the reasons that I wanted to be a part of it. Not only to educate myself, but to also try and reach other white people who have a very hard time imagining themselves in the situation of growing up or being Black in this country.
So let's use that as a jumping off point. Thank you, Harris, who also, I will just add, writes teenage girls almost better than anybody. Not limited to, but let's use that as a jumping off point. I really, I know, I think I know, but I probably don't completely know, but from being in the room, some things that I think felt vital to kind of each of you in terms of what you wanted to bring to the adaptation based on how you connected with the story. And maybe I'll start with Attica.
I think for me to talk about something that really mattered to me in the show, which is why I will commend again Reese's kind of bravery in playing somebody kind of because she's always seen as so kind of sweet or whatever, but it matters that you showed the danger of having a sense of yourself as being above all of that, where you don't check yourself and your behavior. I wanted, and again, for too long in this country, if it didn't look like it came from south of the Mason-Dixon line and there was somebody who's at a picnic lynching, then it wasn't racism, as opposed to the systemic and quiet ways in which people perpetuate inequality. Elena, with this casting of her and Mia, gave us this opportunity that was ripe for exploring that very thing and challenging white folks about the fact that you can have voted for Obama. Not that Obama existed in the 90s. I mean, he did. He was just not him. But I mean, he was him, but he wasn't, you know what I mean? He was state senator, whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? Anyway, the point is you can vote for Obama and still be about some bullshit is kind of what I mean. And I think that with Elena being able to talk about, I marched on Washington and I did this and I did that, it just, well, that ain't really quite it, baby. And when she first brings it up, it's funny because we had a little bit of a debate about this in editing. And I remember saying, if a white person out of nowhere starts telling me about their Black friends and I marched here and there, I actually get frightened. I actually think, why are you acting like you're, So all of this kind of quiet ways in which we are navigating race was interesting to me to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting thinking about editing, because when we edited the pilot, and Raamla, you might be able to speak a little bit to this, because both Amy and Raamla stayed on and were on set, combination of set and prep the entire time. The three of us really had the opportunity to produce this together.
Yeah, I think, when we kind of first got the first cut of the pilot, and I'm not to say everyone did an amazing job, but it just was I think it was important for us to make sure, to Attica's point, that when, Elena's character said something, that we cut back to Mia's reaction, so that, we understood, one, why Mia, was reacting the way she was later in the story and what her story was. And two, just understanding, that coming into a pilot, audiences are watching and trying to get a sense of not just what the show's about, but also what is the show saying. And I think I felt that if we didn't cut to Mia's reactions on some of these lines about either, my mom integrated the school, or, you could be my house helper. If we weren't really truly getting the sense that not only is Mia feeling a way about this, but also the show is saying this, she's doing something right now. We're commenting on.
Nancy, can you talk about what was important to you about what you wanted to say kind of coming in, or even within your own episode, what felt kind of vital?
In episode 2, is just this idea of Mia as just rounding out this idea that of how mothers are portrayed, because I can't really, to me on television, there's such a gap between how mothers really are and the conversations that we had in the room, and how flawed they are and how they're portrayed on television, which to me is just not, it has no relationship to what motherhood looks like day to day. So that felt really vital to me. I think showing Mia as, there's some liberties that we took from the book that I thought were really important, like showing Mia as this fully sexual person. In my recollection, her relationship with Pauline was not fully sexual in the book. But yeah. And so we really delved into her sexuality and wanted to show she is a sexual person. She is a person who was kind of, it could be considered a bad mom on many levels, and that she would not compromise her art for her child. But yet she was a good mom in the end, throughout, really, because she had such a close relationship with Pearl. So it was really, I think what felt vital to me is showing, we talked about this a lot, the ugly parts of motherhood. Something that Attica really touched on, I think, and I'm not sure, I've seen this on TV, maybe it's there and I've missed it, but, episode 2 was the book club, and at the end, towards the end, there was a wonderful long scene, and I'm not patting myself on the back. It's a scene that we all worked together, and and the actors acted the hell out of just Elena and Mia talking about their daughters, and really there's a line in there where Elena says, does your daughter like you? And that's something that Mia never thought about, but I think, to me, a great part of what this show hit in motherhood is jealousy. Just raw, unfiltered, selfish jealousy of, I'm feeling as a mother that my daughter likes somebody else's mother more than me, which is just personally, I'm going to flip out and go crazy about. Also the idea, it's interesting coming in. So that the flaws of motherhood, that and then also the idea that my kids belong to me and they're mine, and this very possessive, it's true, but it's kind of ugly attitude that I feel like is part of a mother's, you are mine, you belong to me. I get to say what you do and who you get to hang out with. I think that we really reflected that in Elena and Mia. So that was important to me.
Yeah. And what about, Raamla, I know we talked a lot in the room about how Black mothers raise Black daughters, as opposed to, anybody else. Talk about the specificity of that, because that was one of the things in the show, especially in your episode, that moved me so much. And I think there were even specific scenes in your episode that could have been seen as superfluous, but weren't.
Like this idea of, we talked about Mia doing Pearl's hair. And then once we kind of got into production, Lexi Underwood, who was just so amazing in the show, she actually had braids. And so it was like, okay, well, she's not going to really be like braiding her hair. So we talked about, okay, what's the thing when you have braids? Like, okay, you need those edges smooth before, the dance. And even if she's mad at her daughter, she's going to sit down and snatch her head around a little bit, but she's going to make sure that her daughter's not going out with raggedy edges. So just those things, showing those moments. And I really, I didn't really realize it was going to be a thing, but I was happy that people kind of saw that moment again, that when I talked to Michael Weaver, the director, I was like, I need to get close on the brown proactive. And he was like, okay. He's like, sure. So yeah, it was good. Like I said, it's important that, that those moments, like you said, that might feel like, oh, it's just a nothing. It's a wordless scene.
And Black women and moms and hair with Black women is a thing. And so it was a piece of texture that no line could have given us.
Let's talk a little about the art and about that moment in 107. The art, obviously, like what Mia had to say with her art and what she was doing. Amy, you were the keeper of all of that. Talk a little bit about that process and about what was, especially building to that final art piece, but with what Mia was doing all the way along, kind of in terms of making Elena her subject.
Yeah. I thought it was really important going into this that the art feel true to Mia, true and consistent, but also it has to serve the narrative, right? So it kind of made sense. We sort of talked through the whole season, and it made sense to work backwards, right, from the final piece. And this idea that very much came from a conversation in the room, that it didn't feel right after what was happening in our series that Mia would leave behind gifts for the Richardsons, which is what she does in the book, because it's a very different dynamic in the book. So we came up with the idea that she would make things, that she would photograph. So the artwork is the photograph, but she could still leave something that's very powerful visually behind that Elena could react to.
So let's talk about that final piece. And we have about 10 minutes left. And so the thing I really want to focus on is just, what do you hope people take away from this show? And obviously the biggest question, which is, why is a story like this so important right now, in this moment, this day in our country even?
Yes, you are the product of your environment, but that doesn't mean you are then trapped in it. You're not trapped in the thinking. I am somebody who, I'm married to a white guy who's from a small town in Missouri. They was having Confederate parades when he was a kid. We got a brother over here who's a Trump supporter. It's crazy. But my husband's life has been lived in such a way that he is a thinking person. He is a curious person, and he investigated the shit that he was raised with. And so I think Elena, looking at that final piece, there's a way in which you can have compassion for, I didn't see some stuff because I was made of this flowered, white, watered down place. So I didn't see stuff. And for a moment, you can give Elena that compassion. But what do you do now, Elena, with that? You can't just rest on the fact that, well, I can't help it. I can't help it. I was born with money. I can't help it. I was born white. I can't help it that I was born Black, but with other resources that other Black people don't have. We all have a responsibility. And I think that's that final art piece to me, that you are of this, but you can break out of it.
Yeah. And you had a lot, I just remember in the room, you had a lot of compassion toward Elena. I feel like
I actually truly do. I truly have compassion for people who are stuck that way. I simply think that Now, if there was not that there is, ain't nobody talking about a season 2, nothing. But if there were season 5 and homegirl was still acting the same way, I mean, I have compassion. But the way she looked at the end, I was like, the door is open, young lady. Come on. But she has been locked in a certain way of thinking, and Mia so disrupts it. I do have compassion for how fucking lost that she feels, but it is incumbent on her to grow up.
Yeah. And Harris, you talked a lot about this in terms of, I mean, talk about what you took away from the experience or what you hope people would take away from the show.
I think that becoming a better person, becoming a more thoughtful person, becoming a more empathetic person takes work. And I understand, and it's something that I'm continually trying to do. But I think as Attica's talking about with Elena, it's like to a certain extent, she comes by her worldview honestly. She was born into it. But when she's confronted with it, she is overly defensive and doesn't for a second take the moment to reflect upon it. And that's sort of natural to be attacked. When people are attacked and called names, their first reaction is to be defensive no matter what the subject is. But I think you can contrast that with Izzy in that scene with Mia, who when Mia calls her out, you're not the exception just because you think you are. Her first reaction is to pout. But then as Mia sort of continues to talk, you can't challenge people without being challenged back or something like that. I think she understands to stop and listen and to reflect. And there's white people like Elena, and then there's white people like Izzy, in the sense that, they feel very self-right things. It's, I'm not one of them, when in fact there's all these assumptions that we all have about everything. And what I would hope is that people watching this show, are more willing to not have a knee-flex defensive reaction, but to really think and interrogate.
One of the anthems of our show that we talked about, I think Shannon said, was just looking at yourself. And we made you look at Elena and Lexi, and we didn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah, one of my favorite, I emailed Liz this, one of my favorite reactions that I got to the show was from an 85-year-old woman in Dallas, lifelong sort of activist and civil rights activist and do-gooder of all kinds. And she said, it made me really uncomfortable, and it made me examine myself in a way that I haven't ever before.
The last thing I just want to talk about is the importance of a room with diversity. And I don't just mean racial diversity, I mean all kinds of diversity. But I want to just talk about our room and what it felt like a different room than any room I had been in before. And I just want to quickly talk, because people will be watching this and assembling their own rooms. People will be trying to get into rooms, and people will be wanting to know how to hire. And I think it's not just about the hashtag show us your room so we can look at something and see the picture and see that it's not all white men, or all white men and women. But I just want to talk about what it means to be in a room like this, and hear from you. I know what it means to me, but I want to hear what it means to you.
Well, I mean, like for me, just honestly, when, I knew it was only going to be 8 writers, and, I knew that, especially being like an upper level writer, I basically assumed that I would be the only Black writer. So to walk into the room and see Shannon and Attica was like, even thinking about it, it gets emotional, because I just realized it was like, oh, I'm not going to have to like spend 75% of my time, speaking from, or just like having to be like the Black, voice that people are like, okay, are we doing things right, Black in the Black way of, the way we're supposed to. And it was great because, Shannon and Attica, we're similar, but we're also very different, and we have different experiences. And Attica can speak to this, but I felt like Attica can have empathy for Elena without, I'm sure, like feeling obligated to also have empathy for Mia and Brian and all that. So for me, it was very freeing to not only talk about the things, if I want to talk about edges and that's important, then great. But I also can talk about like BB and Linda and other characters, and be free of not that burden of race.
I am now terrified that the takeaway from this is Attica has so much compassion for Elaine. No.
No.
Anyway, but I do.
It speaks to you just had a generosity, and I felt like you.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
But that's what I mean is that you were able to like talk about her like as a mother.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and not just from her view, but also as a mother and that part, without feeling like, oh, maybe I got to balance now talking about the Black characters. You know what I mean?
I feel like the room was very safe. And I think that came from the top, both because you, Liz, are somebody who made everybody feel safe. The greatest compliment I've ever given about you that you never heard, because I told it to somebody else, is that I swear to God, you as a boss, I promise you are exactly the same way you were as a writer's assistant. Like, it's very obvious that there's no weird hierarchical flexing going on. You seem like you were probably as you were when you started, as you are now. So I think that sense of there's no punitive energy going around. And I think you also hired people who were respectful of other people. Yeah. So I always felt safe, and I've always had a worldview of room first, Attica second. The room has to function first. So whatever I've not had a ton of beefs, although Shannon and I got into some heated
oh yeah, that's right.
Very heated Monica Lewinsky debate. But at the end of the day, the room is the most important thing. So you never let these kind of debates get in the way of the bigger thing that you're doing. And I just think that there was a base level of respect from everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like the base level of respect, and for me, the amount of energy in me, like not having to be like the sole not white person, not having to be the sole woman, and like constantly checking myself and monitoring myself. Like, am I being too loud? Am I being too like aggressive and bitchy and all that kind of stuff? Like not having to manage my room persona as much, as a woman and as a person of color, just gave me so much more energy to be creative and to talk and just to feel more relaxed. Because I think that is a big part of trying to be a creative person, but it's this completely political atmosphere that as a person of color and as a woman, you're constantly taking the temperature and who am I pissing off and, who am I losing, and all that kind of managing of yourself is just exhausting. And not having to do that was amazing.
I think everybody, not just towards me, but everyone looked at each other with extraordinary amount of good faith. That even if they said something that someone perceived as problematic, it wasn't coming from a hostile place. And I think that is very freeing, and not just about complex political issues, but when you're talking about your personal feelings and your personal experiences, which is just, that's where all the best stories come from. People have to feel comfortable enough to share anything. And that this room had that in abundance.
It also felt like it was not just about talking and getting your point in, but it was a lot about listening. I feel like there was so much listening that made our room successful.
I remember I was downstairs. We had like multiple levels in our office, and I was downstairs working on my episode, and I just would hear this like raucous laughter, and I'd be like, and I was like, are we that loud? But I also was so happy because I was like, I was also like, oh man, like there's so much joy that happens every day that we would feel, even as we had these intense, deep discussions. I was just like, we had so much fun in that room too, so that also was, it didn't feel like at the end of the day, like when you go home, you're like, oh, like it's been such a drag. Like I felt like still like, good about life.
Absolutely. I know. I felt so invigorated and inspired by the room. And I think that is like, we were having hard conversations and having to, at least I can speak from confront things within me that I hadn't thought about before. But I think when I think of the room, I think of the joyfulness of the room. And I think about how we drank all the wine at Moza and they cut us off. And we were like, are you out of wine? And they were like, no group of people can have that much wine. But we didn't want to leave after spending 10
had a calculator. He was like, by my calculations, each of you idiots, get out.
Yeah, after a full day together, we still want to spend hours.
Exactly, which is so amazing and speaks to this group. And I could obviously do this for a long time. I love hearing you guys speak about the show. I love you all so much. And I know that today wasn't the easiest day to get on and do this, obviously, but I'm so glad that we did. And I'm so glad that everyone at ATX also gets to kind of see and experience your brilliance, and we'll see everything you brought to the show as they, maybe watch the show again.
And thank you, Liz, for putting thought into the room you were, putting together, because I also think that makes a difference. I think showrunners should know that I think it's easy to fill a room with all your friends and people you're comfortable with, but I also think that it's important to really, like, every single person in the room, Shannon included, who's not with us, but contributed something specific to the show. And I think that you really took time and thought about who you wanted in the room, not just like creatively, but also like, Nancy and Attica were like about like creating a safe space, and making sure that this was going to be, a room full of people who, where it was going to matter. And all their voices would matter. So I just want to kind of say that and reiterate the point of the importance of really thinking about who you're putting, what writers you're putting in a room, and not just, like I said, doing what's comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great note to end on. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Guys, and you.